So here we are, still in Yugoslavia, that enormous swathe of southern Europe held together by Tito, which never really survived long after his death. In those days it looked a lot more like the Europe of the 19th century. We were approaching that point in the journey where I was foolish enough to be taking pictures in the wrong place at the wrong time and found myself arrested for espionage. A brief episode which didn't really have too much effect on the journey as a whole, but just served as a salutary example of mistakes one can make when we're travelling way off the beaten track. It was here in Nice, taking these photographs, that I got into trouble. Robin Whitelaw, our Canadian architect friend, was taking these pictures of Jamila Khan having her shoes polished, followed eventually by myself. And it was at this point that the officious little policeman came over and insisted that we were under arrest, and when we challenged him as to why, explained we'd been committing espionage. From Yugoslavia, we crossed the border into Bulgaria, which was then very much an Iron Curtain country. Some curiously Byzantine presence still lingered over Bulgaria. In 1014, the Byzantine Emperor Basil II had won a battle over the Bulgarian army, after which he ordered 14,000 prisoners to be blinded. It seemed as if the current communist regime had condemned the entire Bulgarian populace to the same fate, more mercifully fulfilled by effectively putting blinkers on the lot of them. Our visas stipulated that we were granted 24 hours to traverse the country, and our cameras were sealed on entry. Moving slowly through the streets of Sofia, looking for the hotel, the Indiaman attracted the attention due to an unidentifiable fleeting object. Men deserted their tables at outdoor cafes to come running after us, trying to comprehend the astonishing news of our origin and destination, as conveyed by the map spread across both sides of our vehicle. They looked up at our windows as if expecting to see green faces with pointed ears. Some clung to the partly open door behind Moti's bedroll, employing scant English and desperate appeals to be pulled aboard, to be hidden in our baggage, to be smuggled out of the country. They would be willing on the spur of that incredible moment to desert wife, children, home and country in order to be transported to another galaxy. We swept through the remains of Bulgaria without pause the following day, crossing the Turkish border well before the expiry of our time limit. But the strain proved too much for Paddy Garrow-Fisher. In the darkness on the other side of Edirne, he pulled over on the verge and fell asleep across the wheel. Moti made herself as comfortable as she could, curled up on the bedroll beside him like a cat on a beanbag. We looked at each other, wondering what to do. The scant food and drink we had brought with us had been shared out earlier in the day in the best traditions of collectivist comradeship. It was too late and too dark to break out the tents and the leaky air mattresses from the back of the bus. Besides, we had nowhere to camp, for on both sides of the road stretched cornfields. What I had not appreciated was how much of Turkey lay on the other side of the Sea of Marmara. It was a country with most of its foot in Asia and a mere toehold in Europe. There was no bridge across the Bosporus in those days. One went by ferry, which made you acutely aware of departing one continent and arriving at another. Disembarking in eastern Turkey, we wasted no time heading for Ankara, a capital founded by the amazing Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, 20th century antithesis of Suleiman the Great, the reformer, versus the conqueror. Ankara had been continuously inhabited since the Bronze Age. The very fine Museum of Anatolian Civilizations recorded the pulse of cultures that had flowed through Turkey's veins from Hittites, Phrygians, Lydians and Persians to Galatians, Romans, Byzantines, Seljuk Turks and Ottomans. A small provincial town until Ataturk declared in the capital of the new republic on October the 13th, 1923, Ankara had since developed rapidly, leaving the old settlement largely untouched, clinging to its hills like tide marks left behind by some historic flood. It was the only city in Turkey with an urban development plan, dating back to the 1930s. Ataturk's mausoleum, which I had set out to visit the moment I packed my bags in our modest little hotel, dominated modern Ankara from its own hilltop. The following morning I set out with a group of my fellow travellers to explore the old town, less impressive perhaps, but infinitely more atmospheric and full of life than the severe grid structure of the new. We scaled one of the hills and looked down on a bone-dry riverbed, coiling through a ravine between our hill and the next. We saw parked cars, tractors, and earth-moving machinery, apparently constructing a road. People wandering the riverbank, engaged in conversation. Then we turned away to photograph a noisy group of children, vying for our attention. Suddenly a hue and cry broke out, and people ran past us to crowd the parapet we had just vacated. Below us, an incredible raging brown torrent had erased all trace of the scene we had witnessed just moments before. Cars, machinery, people, all were gone. Further down the course of this instant ferment, other vehicles were tossed aside or carried bodily upon the flood. Houses were crumbling from the impact, and a wide swathe of destruction was spreading into downtown Ankara. Occupants of houses nearer to us, their lower floors already inundated by rising waters, were throwing out their possessions to friends and family still occupying dry land. Under a cloudless blue sky, the spectacle was so incomprehensible that it defied explanation. Only later did we learn that a distant thunderstorm had breached an ancient dam and sent its contents hurtling towards the city, faster than the proverbial rumor of disaster that allegedly outstrips horse and telegraph. Hundreds of lives were almost instantly snuffed out. To return to our hotel entailed a circuitous course and much trial and error, as we encountered flooded side streets too deep to forge. A conference that night with Paddy elicited the disconcerting news that the route we had planned to take out of the city was no longer passable. We would now have to make a wide detour far to the south, via Kayseri and Siva, losing much time in the process. But even on that route we would run into difficulty.